well, and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 3 English lesson on subject and predicate. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English language arts. Grade 3. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of subject and predicate. All right, so we see that our chapter is subject and predicate. Our chapter is subject and predicate. Our subject is English language arts. Grade 3. And then our lessons that we're going to be focusing on under the chapter of subject and predicate. It's to identify the simple subject or predicate of the sentence. All right. So this is a continuation of our previous lesson on um, on subject and predicate. In our previous lesson, we focused on finding out what a subject is and then also finding out what a predicate is. So today we're just going to also continue to identify both simple subjects as well as simple predicate. All right. So when it comes to subjects, right, then every sentence it has a subject. Actually, when it comes to a sentence, then every sentence has a subject, and every sentence has a predicate. And the simple subject, right, of a sentence, the simple subject of a sentence, it tells who or what is doing something. So the simple subject of a sentence tells us who or what is doing something, right? And it can either just be one word, or it can be more than one word that tells us about what the subject is doing. It tells us either who or what is doing something. We didn't do predicate on Friday. We only did it on yesterday. Yesterday and today we're finishing off. Anyways, so with every subject, with every sentence, right, we have a simple subject and we also have a simple predicate, right? And every sentence, it has, like we said, it has a subject, a predicate, and the simple subject of a sentence, it tells us either who is doing something or it tells us what is doing something. And with the simple subject, right, it is just the subject noun, or it can be the pronoun without any other words to tell you more about it. So, which means that in our previous lesson, we did subject and predicate, right? And we specifically said that it is it is basically the noun plus any other words that tells us who or what is doing something. But in this case, it is just the subject noun, or it is just the pronoun without any other words that tells you more about it. So we should only identify who or what is doing something and not stall the extras. And if we look at an example, right, of a simple subject, then we say she sleeps a lot. So now we need to ask ourselves who sleeps a lot. So you ask yourself who is doing something or what is doing something. And they said that we either need to identify the noun or the pronoun within that simple sentence to tell us either who is doing something or what is doing something. So it says she sleeps a lot. And if we were to identify who does something, and then we would say it is she. And then it says her friend sleeps a lot. So if we want to know who sleeps a lot, we would say it is her friend or just the friend, and the friend being the noun, right? And the same here, her best friend sleeps a lot. It is just the friend. Because each simple subject, it tells us who sleeps a lot, which is either she or it is the friend. And then we also have our simple predicate, right? And the simple predicate, it tells us what the subject is doing. It's like an action. And it is basically just the verb without any other words. It tells us more about it. Because this is a simple subject. So it's just the verb without any other words. It tells us more about it. For example, it says her friend sleeps. So now you need to ask yourself, what is the person doing? Right? And if we were to say what the person is doing, then we could say the person sleeps. So sleeps then becomes our predicate because it tells us what the person is doing, what the subject is doing. And then also in our next sentence, we also need to say what the subject is doing without any other words. It tells us more about it. And then we can also say her friend sleeps a lot. So if we were to identify what a friend does, then also within the sentence, we can just say her friend sleeps. Not all the other extras, only sleeps. Only the action, only the verb that tells us what the friend is doing. And then we have another sentence where it says, her friend sleeps on a weekend. Her friend sleeps on a weekend. And if we were to identify our predicate within the sentence, then also we will only say sleeps because it's the action that the friend is doing, right? And we don't still have to say on a weekend. So we're only giving um the predicate. We're only giving the verb without telling any other details or giving any other details about the verb. And when it comes to the simple predicate, then each simple predicate, it tells us what the friend does. And in this case, the friend sleeps. And what you've noticed is that when it comes to a subject and a predicate, right? If it's just a subject and a predicate, then sometimes the subject, it tells us who or what is doing something, and they identify basically everything that tells us about the noun or the pronoun. And the same with the predicate, right? It tells us what the subject is doing, and it will be the verb and all the other things. It tells us more about the verb. But when it comes to a simple subject, right? Then it's only the noun or only the pronoun of the subject that tells us who or what is doing. And then when it comes to the simple predicate, then it is basically only basically the verb that tells us what the subject is doing without any other details that tells us more about the verb. All right. So that is basically simple subject and simple predicate. So now let us go to we're going to aplusstudents.ca, and that is where we are going to identify the simple subject or the simple predicate within the sentence. All right, so we're going to aplusstudents.ca, and then we're going to the lesson that says identify the simple subject or the predicate of a sentence. All right, so once again, we said every sentence has a subject and a predicate, and then a simple subject, right? It tells us either who or it tells us what is doing something. And when it comes to the subject, and then it just gives us information about the noun or the pronoun, just the subject, noun, or pronoun without any other words that tells us more about it. And then we made an example where we said, she sleeps a lot. And then we identify the pronoun, which is she. Her friend sleeps a lot, right? And remember, with the simple subject, we only identify the noun, which is friend, not her friend, just friend. And then also, her best friend sleeps a lot, right? And then we only say friend because we said with our simple subject, we only identify the noun or pronoun without any other words that tells us more about it. And then we also have our simple predicate, right? And we said it tells us what the subject is doing, which is just the verb without any other words. It tells us more about it. And we made an example where we said her friend sleeps. So if we identify our verb within that sentence, then we would say it sleeps. Her friend sleeps a lot, right? And we said we are not adding all the other things. So we just say the verb without any other words. It tells us more about it. Her best friend or her friend sleeps a lot on the weekend. So just sleeps, not the other things. Because remember, it is just a simple predicate, just a simple subject. So you only identify the noun or pronoun, or you only identify the verb, right? All right, so now we're going to do an activity where we are either going to identify simple subjects or we are going to identify the simple predicate. It says we need to select the simple subject within the sentence. It says ants have 6 legs. Ants have 6 legs. So we need to identify the subject within the sentence. So we need to identify the subject within the sentence. What do you think might be the subject within the sentence that tells us either who or what is doing something? It says ants have 6 legs. All right. So if we were to identify our simple subject within the sentence, right, that tells us either who is doing something or what is doing something, and then we can say ants is our subject, right? So ants is our subject that tells us either who is doing something or what is doing something. So ants is correct. So well done. So we're going to the next one. It says select the simple subject. The telephone rang loudly. So the telephone rang loudly. We need to identify the subject that tells us either who or what is doing something. So the telephone rang loudly. We need to identify the simple subject within that sentence by saying either who is doing something or what is doing something. So we need to select the simple subject. It says the telephone rang loudly. Who is doing something or what is doing something within the sentence? All right, so if we were to identify the simple subject within that sentence, right, that either tells us who or what is doing something, and then we can say telephone, because remember we said it is only the noun or only the pronoun without any other words that tells us about it. So basically, telephone is our subject. So telephone is our subject. Now we're going to the next simple sentence that we are going to identify. The simple subject, sorry. It says the firefighter aimed the hose. The firefighter aimed the hose. We need to identify the simple subject within the sentence. The firefighter aimed the hose. So we need to say either who or what is doing something. So we need to identify the simple subject that tells us either who is doing something or what is doing something within that sentence, right? And remember, it is just the noun, just the pronoun, without any other words that tells us more about it. So we need to identify the simple subject. The firefighter aimed the hose. All right, so if we were to identify our simple subject within the sentence, and then we would say it is firefighter. So not the firefighter, just firefighter, right? Because firefighter, it is the subject, right, that either tells us who is doing something or what is doing something. It tells us that the firefighter aimed the hose, right? So only the noun, not any other words it comes with it, right? So firefighter is our subject. So that is our simple subject. Only the noun. All right, so now let's go to our test, right? Where we are going to identify the simple subject or the predicate of a sentence. All right, it says we need to select the simple predicate within that sentence. The simple predicate, remember we said that the simple predicate is only the verb within that sentence, the action, not all the other extras. So only the verb is our predicate. So it says Maggie's teacher announced the winner. Maggie's teacher announced the winner. So we need to identify the simple predicate within that sentence. Is it announced or is it winner? We need to identify the predicate within that sentence. So we need to select the simple predicate within that sentence. Is it option one, announced, or option two, winner? It says Maggie's teacher announced the winner. All right, so if we were to identify our simple predicate within that sentence, which is our verb, right? It is the action that tells us what the noun is doing. And then we can say it is announced. So option one is correct. Announced is correct. So well done. Well done. We need to select the simple predicate within the sentence. It says, the cook roasts the meat. The cook roasts the meat. What is the verb or the predicate within the sentence, which is it roasts or is it meat? The cook roasts the meat. The verb within that sentence, the action within that sentence, the predicate within that sentence that tells us what the subject is doing. Is it option one, which is roasts, or option two, which is meat? All right, and if we were to identify our simple predicate within the sentence, and then we can say the cook roasts. So, roasts is then our predicate that tells us what the cook does, right? So, roasts is our predicate, it's the verb, it's the action that is taking place within that sentence. And well done, roasts or option one is correct. My brothers mastered that game. So my brothers mastered that game. We need to select the subject that tells us either who or what is doing something. So we need to select the simple subject that either tells us who is doing something or what is doing something within the sentence. Remember, only the noun or only the pronoun without all the other extras. So is it brothers or is it game? All right, and if we were to select our subject within that sentence, our simple subject, then yes, we would say brothers, right? Because if we were to answer who, and then we can say it is the brothers that did the action. So well done. Brothers is correct. We need to select the simple subject within the sentence. It is Dad bakes great bread. Dad bakes great bread. We need to select the subject of that sentence, the simple subject of that sentence. Is it dad? Is it cakes? Is it bakes? Is it dad? Is it cakes or is it bakes? We need to select the simple subject that tells us either who is doing something or what is doing something. Only the noun or the pronoun. All right, and if we were to identify our simple subject within that sentence, right? And then we would identify our simple subject that tells us either who is doing something or what is doing something. And then we can say it is, yes, it is option one. It is dad, right? Because it tells us either who is doing something or who is telling us what is doing something. So dad is the one that bakes. Eyeball. The subject bakes. I think here is a mistake because bakes is a predicate. Guys, just bakes is a verb, right? Which means that our answer is supposed to be dad, unless the question is they probably were supposed to say the predicate in this case. But dad is correct, right? So dad is correct. Leave it just so, because as the subject is dad, bakes is the predicate. Bakes is the verb that tells us what dad is doing. So just leave it as dad, right? So well done, guys. Dad is correct. All right, let's identify the predicate within that sentence. It says the peddler sold tools. The peddler sold tools. What is our predicate within that sentence? The verb within that sentence. Is it sold or is it tools? The simple predicate. So we need to identify the simple predicate that tells us the action that the subject does, the verb within that sentence. All right, so if we were to identify our simple predicate within that sentence, which is the verb, only the verb, not all the other extras within that sentence, right? And then we can say the peddler sold tools, which means that we can say sold is our predicate, right? Because it tells us what the peddler does. So well done. It tells us what the peddler does. So the peddler sold the tools, right? It's the action that he does. Owen sold his bike. We need to identify the predicate also in the sentence. Owen sold his bike. We need to identify the verb, the action within that sentence. Is it sold or is it his? Sold or his? Because it says Owen sold his bike. All right, then if we were to identify our simple predicate within that sentence, which is the verb which is within that sentence, the action, and then we can also say it is sold. Because what did Owen do? Owen sold his bike, right? That tells us what he did. He sold the bike. Then we can say the telephone rang loudly. The telephone rang loudly. We need to identify the subject within that sentence that either tells us who is doing something or what is doing something. So we need to identify the simple subject that tells us either who is doing something or that tells us what is doing something. And it is either only the noun or it is the noun phrase, the pronoun within that sentence. The telephone rang loudly. All right, and if we were to identify our subject within the sentence, we would say it is telephone because that is our noun or it is our subject within that sentence. So well done. Telephone is correct. All right, let's do our last one. It says the driver drove the bus. We need to select the simple predicate of that sentence. The simple predicate. It says the driver drove the bus. Is it drove or is it driver? Our simple predicate. It is the action, it is the verb within that sentence. It tells us what the subject is doing. The driver drove the bus. So we need to identify our verb, our predicate within that sentence. Is it drove? All right, so if we were to identify our predicate, which is our verb, our action within that sentence, and then we can say drove. Because what did the driver do? He drove the bus. All right, so well done. Drove is correct. So drove, right? Because driver is the subject that did the action, right? So the driver did the action, which means that the driver is a noun, right? It is the who that is doing the action, but but drove is the action within that sentence, right? So well done. Drove is correct. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on subject and predicate. We said that when it comes to subject, it tells us either who or what is doing something. A predicate, it tells us the action that the who or the what is doing, right? Which is the verb. So today we said we were doing simple subject, and we said simple subject. It also makes mention of either the noun or the pronoun within that sentence, but only the noun or the pronoun. The action that the subject that tells us either who or what is doing something, and our simple predicate is the action only, not all the other actions, right? And it also tells us the action that the person or thing is doing. All right, so thank you very much, grade threes, for joining our class on subject and predicate. And I really hope that you're going to have a good day further. Goodbye.